That is working. All right. I'm gonna drop this feed into the old one, but you guys are good. Go ahead and start the intro all over.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to my queen family and anybody else who's out there. Uh, okay, hold on. I host Not Another Chick Flick at Greenland Armor, and tonight we are watching Tragedy Girls at home, but we are watching with actor and director Tyler MacIntyre, who's here tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, Tyler.
Hi.
Well, so tonight we are going to be asking Tyler some questions about the movie, and we're going to be taking your questions as well, so make sure you're typing those in and sending your questions as we go. But Tyler, just to start off, what is one of your favorite parts about the filmmaking process? So as a writer and director, and I've noticed that you've done a lot of everything, what is one of your favorite parts of the filmmaking process?
I kind of I like a lot of different parts of it. I mean, I've been a writer and an editor, so I kind of like I'm kind of used to the parts of it where you sort of go it alone, or at least with a smaller group. I co-wrote this movie with my writing partner Chris Hill, and so we weren't even in the same country when we wrote this, but together we kind of work through it, and then when you're editing, it often is kind of a solitary process. So those ones are always kind of hard, but like I definitely enjoy like the production of it because it's a little bit more rare. Like I feel like I spend more time writing and more time in post than I do. Like I spend a lot more time writing and a fair amount of time like once a movie's shot, but like the actual like onset working is the most expensive part, and so it makes it more special when you get to actually do it. Um, but like my favorite time, or like my favorite actual like moment, is probably when you have everything kind of together for like they call them the camera tests, and that's like usually the first time that like a person is in like a full costume or with makeup, and you can finally like it's the actor you picked, and they're dressed like the character that you talked about this whole time, and you're just kind of like, oh, that's the person I imagined, and that moment's always kind of interesting, or most interesting to me, and probably my favorite part.
Yeah, that's perfect. When it all comes together and like it's becoming real life. That's awesome. So what your first feature was Patchwork, correct? The first one that you wrote and directed. What were some of the things that you learned when making your first feature that maybe you used on Tragedy Girls?
Yeah, I mean, Patrick was quite a different experience. Like we definitely had. I mean, like it was also a horror comedy. Also kind of about a group of three. Essentially, those who haven't seen it, it's like a Frankenstein movie, like a riff on like kind of like 80s sort of splatstick movies. And it's about these three women who go out partying one night and then end up stitched together in the same body as like this Frankenstein type character, and then they go on this like mission to find who did this to them and exact revenge. But it has a similar tone to Tragedy Girls. It's a little bit gooier, a little bit rougher, but a lot of like the energy is similar, and our styles kind of the same, and we kept a lot of the same creative team. And so we had like almost no money. Like it's what they call ultra low, which is like a very very small feature film that costs as much as some short films. And we shot it in 12 days, in Los Angeles, like powered by a lot of favors and one very supportive investor, and that's kind of like how we sort of brought it to life, and a lot of our a lot of the actors I'm very close friends with, and they all kind of hauled ass for us, and it became like a real kind of bonding experience. And so I knew like going into Tragedy Girls, that we were gonna have a little bit more resources. We're gonna have like many times the number. I mean, even though Tragedy Girls is not that huge a budget movie anyway, but it's kind of like an actual like much more professional budget. Like I knew that like I started kind of thinking like, well, what type of team, and a lot of the people were kind of, I was getting different advice, and people were saying like, well, you got to surround yourself with people who are going to make you better, and so you should like hire like somebody who's made like 50 movies, like it, and then and so I started kind of like looking into that, like thinking about like, well, like what are the DPs and production designers and composers that are like kind of a bigger level? Should we be courting some of them and trying to get them down to like our kind of lowish budget movie, and then I realized like I don't want that like that's not really my style. Like I really want to take the people who like stretch nothing into something, and so I ended up with a lot of the same creative team, like the same director of photography, same production designer. When I took we went from one movie that we had a certain amount of money to another one where we had like 40 to 50 times that, and you could see them like with a whole team behind them, they all kind of stepped up, and he's like literally the same costume designer and the same composer and same production designer, and we actually got a much better editor than me, and it all kind of and we all kind of went out there, and they because we kind of had this experience together on Patchwork, I think it really came across in Tragedy Girls that we were able to kind of keep the team together, and everyone was like suffering together to try and make it work.
Awesome. I love that. That's awesome that you were able to keep so many of the same people. And yeah, I mean, I loved Patchwork too. I thought it was super fun. So it's definitely, if you haven't watched it, everybody out there, you should definitely check it out if you enjoyed Tragedy Girls. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's on Shudder right now, actually, if anyone has that.
There you go. So streaming on Shudder. I think everybody's on Shudder right now. Everybody's on all the streaming anything. That's all we're doing here. Okay, so what was one of the biggest challenges you faced in making Tragedy Girls, as far as like, was it like an easy thing to pitch, like getting it made? Was there a difficult process at all, or how did that all go?
Yeah, it was. It was a bit unusual. It was. Relatively fast. It took about a year. But between like when we first kind of heard about it to when we started shooting it, which is quick. As we're discovering is quick. There was actually an existing script by a gentleman named Justin Olson that was like a spec script that had sold to this company that a friend of mine had worked at or was working at, and it was like a pretty like straightforward slasher with the name Tragedy Girls, and they had kind of like people. The company liked the idea of doing a slasher, like especially if it was female led, but no one was really responding to the script. So then my friend of mine who was working in development there, a guy named Tom Morris, who ended up being one of the producers on Tragedy Girls. He called us in and got us to take a look at the script, and was like, can you guys figure out like a more fresh way into this? Because he'd seen a rough cut of Patchwork and thought that we might be able to bring that sort of energy to it. And then Chris and I just started talking about like what what we liked about slasher movies growing up, and like my very formative years were during that like Kevin Williamson like neo slasher resurgence, with like Scream and I Know You Did Last Summer and a lot of those like The Faculty, and so I had an affinity for like those movies that were kind of like John Hughes movies that were slasher movies, and so I really wanted to make a slasher, but then fill in the DNA with like those kind of that great generation of teen movies and stuff, those type of movies, the way they made me feel. And so Chris and I started kind of thinking about like, well, maybe the reason that people aren't making slasher movies right now, and this was like 2015 when there was since Saw kind of ended, there wasn't, other than I guess the Hatchet series, God bless Adam Green, there's not there wasn't too much out there for like those sort of horror fans, and so we want to really make it like a straight like an actual like honest to God slasher movie, but then have to find like a fresher way into it. And so it started off with the idea of kind of like making traditionally like slashers have such a mixed history with like the representation of women, and it's like on the one side it's like they're kind of empowering with like the whole like final girl tropes and things like that, but at the same time they're very objectifying, and a lot of it is still very much in this kind of male point of view, and we were like, but we're guys, like how do we get around that? And so we decided to like well, let's put it like hard into their perspective. Like it's very much about these two women, and it's their subjective point of view of the world. So like everything is like the pace of the movie and like the lens choices and the kinetic camera work. All of this comes out of like their personality, and like the rhythm of the movie. Is all kind of informed by like how their brains are working. And so once we kind of had that idea, we kind of backed our way into the opening scene where you have kind of like this sort of like purposefully cliche kind of scene with like this couple on Lover's Lane, and then it gets sort of thrown for a loop, and now you're kind of behind the scenes of this kind of different ride.
Yeah, I love that opening scene, and then when the title card just pops in, it's like so fun. So, okay, so obviously you just mentioned quite a few of the horror influences you had when you were working on this movie, and there's a lot of horror references in Tragedy Girls. Are there any other types of films or specific films that you feel like influenced you when you were working on the writing and directing of this that maybe are outside the horror world? Like we mentioned, like people that love Heathers will love this movie, but like, are there any other things that you feel like you were influenced by?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like was influenced, like I mentioned, kind of like teen movies. Like I think a lot of I knew I wanted to do stuff that kind of had that vibe to it, and so I revisited a lot of like 10 Things I Hate About You sort of like era things. But we wanted at the same time to be a bit critical of some of like those tropes that haven't aged very well. Like specifically, like like I bring up 10 Things or sorry, not 10 Things About Me, but Can't Hardly Wait. This idea of like this unrequited like beta male like I saw her from afar years ago and I know I love her even though I've never talked to her. And it's like this weird kind of like toxic projection like hasn't really aged very well, and so we wanted to kind of so that's kind of where the idea for Jack Quaid's character came from, is this idea of like that sort of like, well, I'll just be her best friend, and then eventually she'll relate close to me, kind of thing. And then him just being so wrong about the girl that he picks, and so we wanted to kind of like take those tropes and spin them a little bit. There's definitely a lot of those sorts of like I would say more 90s than 80s like teen movies in there. And at that same time, like we took a lot of cues from Dakota, who did a great job with the costume design and have a lot of fun doing it. I think like we watched a lot of like Jawbreaker and that sort of which I love, and I saw it as part of the pre-show, and I was like, yes. And I just worked with Judy Greer too, which was was in that movie, and so I was like, how was Jawbreaker? And she's like, nobody asked me. Anyway, it was just kind of the movie's a ton of fun if anyone hasn't seen it. So those were a big influence on me, and then some that aren't like slasher movies, like that are still horror movies, like Ginger Snaps has like a great kind of like central relationship to it. And like when I was growing up, like that movie was shot about 2 hours. It was shot in Canada, like near where I grew up. So like that was such like a huge thing for me. Was like like kind of seeing like, oh, see, it can be done kind of thing. And then like non-traditional like slashers you don't hear a ton about, like Prom Night 2. If anyone's seen that, like yeah. Yes. Which is like I think very underrated. Like people kind of wrote it off as this like Elm Street kind of knockoff, which it is, very proudly. And it's also kind of like it's not really a Prom Night sequel, but it is kind of a Carrie sequel. And it's like it's like if somebody like took Carrie and then decided to take like the Evil Dead 2 approach to its like sequel. And it's just a ton of fun too. And so I kind of scrambled all these things up in my brain. And Chris was very, responsible, I think, for like nailing down a lot more of the furniture than I was.
Well, you just listed a lot of movies that have been either shown or on the list for Not Another Chick Flick. So just totally vibing with everything you're saying right there. I love pretty much everything you just mentioned. Before we got on live, we were talking about some upcoming projects. So what are you working on next? What's upcoming? I know, obviously, we can watch something maybe that's coming up on Hulu soon. And can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So it just got announced today that I directed an episode, which is actually feature length. So it's I guess my third feature, but it's technically an episode of television called Good Boy, which is like an evil dog movie, and it's part of the Hulu Into the Dark series that they've been doing, and so that goes up on June 12th. So if you watch Strategy Girls on Hulu, you can watch Good Boy on Hulu. And that it stars Judy Greer, who I just mentioned, who is amazing. And if you can't think of her off the top of your head, you will definitely recognize her face. She's been in everything and has been amazing, and is the sweetest woman in the world. And Steve Guttenberg's in it as well, and Ellen Wong from Scott Pilgrim and Glow. Where we had a really good, really strong cast for it, and it's a similar kind of like sort of a satire of LA pet culture. But it's it should be fun. I'm excited to see people or see people's reaction to it.
Awesome. I'm excited to check it out. And that's out is that out in June? Is that correct?
Yeah, June 12th. Yeah, it's their. I think it's the last or second last one.
Okay. Awesome. So if you could remake, which I know remake or reboot, whatever, any classic, what would it be?
Wow.
It's kind of a tough question, I guess.
Like Bonnie and Clyde.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
I love that. That's fun.
Yeah, and I mean, like there's been a lot of remakes of that thing, but like that's, remaking that like Arthur Penn Bonnie and Clyde, I think would be awesome. It's just such a simple kind of story.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so do we have any viewer questions at this point? I have a couple more questions, but I just didn't know. Do we have some viewer questions?
Yeah, we have a handful. Well, Tyler, you moved your head, and I noticed we have the exact same poster, which is hanging up. Mine's is it the pink writing? Is it the green of pink?
No, it's Mondo of Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah, no, I have the same one. It's literally right over here. Is yours pink writing or is it the white writing? I can't tell.
Oh, it's pink.
All right, we got the same one just around the corner for me. I saw your head move. I was like, holy shit, we got the same poster.
That's actually a new acquisition. I just got that like last week. So.
Oh, nice. I think I got mine. It sold out quick. I think I got that 2 years ago, and there was a black and white one. That's why I can't tell because Skype's not nice. And then, but that's the variant. They only did like I think 40 of the variants. So, good job getting the better of the two because it's real cool. That's not a question. That was just my observation. The first question was, where did you shoot Tragedy Girls? It looked very familiar. Was it in the Midwest?
We shot in Kentucky. So it's about 2 hours south of Louisville, and so a lot of people flew to Cincinnati, and a lot of the crew came from like Ohio, and a few from Atlanta, and but we shot in Kentucky it's near Lexington. It's a town called Springfield, and it's about 10 minutes away from a town called Lebanon, that's spelled like Lebanon. So Springfield and Lebanon were kind of the two places that we shot mostly. It was like a middle school that we used as the high school, and a lot of our like extras went to that middle school, or like when they were younger, but they were we had a lot of really enthusiastic kind of young people from the community that ended up in a shocking amount of the movie.
The next question is, which I totally forgot Craig Robinson was involved in this film until, well, he shows up, and I was like, oh, and then at the end he's listed as a producer. So how did Craig Robinson get involved in this film?
I think Craig might have forgot he was in this movie. But no, he was one of the first people on, actually. So like we had, we were just kind of testing the waters. Like once we had our kind of producing team, the next thing you do generally is try and get talent. And so we had gone out to this company called 3 Arts is a big management company. They have a lot of like comedic talent. And so Craig was there, and someone had mentioned that he was kind of getting deeper into producing and kind of liked stuff that was a little edgy and a little like off the beaten path. And so we had sent it to him and his team, and he read it and came on as a producer first. So then we started kind of working with him and his partner on that. And then once we got Alexandra Shipp and Brianna Hildebrand in as the two girls, then Craig was more like, can I be in this? Like, and so because he just really thought they were great, and so then we the cast started coming together, and once we had Craig on and Josh on and Kevin Durand and everybody, it really came together. But yeah, Craig was actually a big reason why it got made as quickly as it did. He kind of had the guts to come on early and was super supportive too. Like that's the other thing is he like giving his thoughts on the script, on the cut, like was always very like in our corner for I don't think we had to do anything crazy often because he kind of had our back.
Yeah, I always like to see what Craig Robinson does when he shows up in films, and in this, there's definitely the Craig Robinson version we would expect him to have played in this, and he doesn't really do the Craig Robinson thing he typically does. He kind of plays the more straight man. I like that he's the hero and he's like working out and being this fit guy. Everything he does in this movie is like totally anti what you expect him typically to go down. So it's funny that this is the role he ended up with, but let's see what else we got here. And there's a lot of people talking about how much they loved it, and they're gonna suggest it to their either daughters or younger friends. It is. So I recently watched the film. I think it was Joseph Kahn's Detention from 2011. So that's a film that I don't think a lot of people saw, but the energy behind that film. So I've only seen it once till recently, and I recall really enjoying it. And I was like, oh, that I guess like kind of feels similar to Tragedy Girls, and that it's like that kind of influenced by Kevin Williamson's style of slasher film. Although it's like on acid, it's like Oliver Stone, Natural Born Killers version of a Kevin Williamson film. But the I guess one thing that stuck out watching it years later is, unlike Tragedy Girls, the dialogue's not as realistic. I think you all really nailed the persona of what it's like to be a young person without being like, oh, this is written by an older white guy who doesn't know anything about talking. So just from my own curiosity, what was it like, besides just trying to like write good female characters, but write smart characters that talk realistically, and that you're not a 17-year-old girl?
Yeah, well, we were very worried about that, obviously, for obvious reasons. Like, we wanted it to be like authentic in a certain way, but at the same time, like, the movie is very stylized. So like we couldn't, it's not like you want like, like a maybe like 8th grade style, like real dialogue, and real situations like that. Like that wasn't us. We had to kind of push it in this hyperbolic, satirical, kind of high energy way. But at the same time, like I was very aware of Detention, and kind of like they went down the same road as us, but they like drove off that cliff like in a very very direct way. And so Pavel and Martin Pensa, who's the editor, and myself talked a lot about that, and because Detention really was like a little bit ahead of its time.
Oh yeah,
it does a lot of things that like Scott Pilgrim does, and it does a lot of them almost as well. But at the same time, people really reacted poorly against, it was like too much too soon or something. And so we knew that we kind of had to temper it a little bit to try and, we can go super energetic, but we can't go it can't be the point where it turns people off or feels too strange. And so we ended up kind of pulling the reins back a little bit because of Detention specifically. But that said, specifically with the dialogue and trying to make it authentic for younger people. When I'm, I guess when I wrote it, I was, 30. So you can still remember what high school was like, but it was a distant memory. I kind of we had just written a movie that was more about women in their kind of early 20s or mid 20s, and so we had. That was kind of how the first draft sounded. It sounded kind of like they're not quite in high school, like they've been through college, and so we had to kind of simplify, I think, a lot of it, and it was more about finding the rhythm of it. And then what I did was actually I did a table read with some young actresses, one of which was a daughter of a friend of mine who was 16 at the time, and it was her and a friend of hers, and we just sat down and read through the whole script, and then just I just noted oh well. They laughed at this, they got that, and like, oh, this part, was rang kind of false, and then I would like talk it through with them, like, well, what about this didn't work? What about that? And they actually brought a lot of ideas to the table, and some of their suggestions are in the finished film, and then and so that process I think really helped make it a little bit more authentic, and then another layer was like once we actually cast the actresses. I mean, Brianna was turned 19 while we were shooting the movie. So like it was like she was still very much in that kind of headspace, and so they kind of kept it honest. I think in terms of like during rehearsal and things like that, we were able to call out things that were working and kind of refocus it. Maybe you got to be careful because I mean just because you can very easily get a sense of like no I want it this way, and then it'll turn people off, like high school kids especially. But thankfully I think we've ended up at like there's kind of truth behind like these relationships that helps let us off the hook for the things that maybe aren't 100% right or maybe a little too stylized. But yeah, I mean I'm just thankful that people kind of were able to see a little bit themselves in it, which is nice.
So kind of to bounce off of that, I thought your use of social media was really like smart, and also it just felt very real as well. And I've heard you talk a little bit about like what you wanted to say about social media when you were doing this movie as well. Can you talk a little bit more about that, like what the social media message was kind of behind this too, or like?
Yeah, I mean, I've always wanted to media in general. I find has a way of very much like as long as you're if you saw somebody get punched in real life, it would be like whoa. But if you saw a video of somebody getting punched, you'd be like, ha, and there's something about this artificial, like when you're experiencing something through a medium, it really changes your experience of it, and it allows you to kind of like, you let a lot of your like into what you're experiencing, and it really makes people very cold, and makes, and I think there's something about like the narcissism of social media, and it kind of like encourages that. This kind of like, so we wanted to essentially take like sort of the narcissism that's inherent with heavy social media use and pair that with like psychopathic narcissism in a very direct way that is, quite satirical. And like I mean like in a and like we were watching like RoboCop as a reference. Like we were really trying to keep it like quite obvious. That this is a hyper reality. And because of that, it ended up being like having some more message, but people people who tuned into the satire, which I think is most people, like I think got the film on some level, but then you have this kind of small portion where they're like, are you really supporting murder? And you had to kind of like be like, no, I'm not. Like I literally didn't make a movie that's like pro mass murder. Like that would be insane. And that's an assumption that I hope everybody walking in the theater, assumes. Like, I mean, or else how, do you function? Anyway, so if you can have the movie goes out of its way to kind of set that timber pretty early on, and then if you're willing to go with it, it has a lot of fun. But at the same time, like certain people, I think have a hard time with that for whatever reason, and then just not for them. Like so they can sit on the sidelines and clutch the pearls, and that's fine. But we can, it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't need to be for everybody. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of making an independent film is, you like once you're done, you kind of answer the audience,
Yeah. I mean, I love movies that aren't for everybody. I mean, Heather's, like, we've mentioned that a couple times, Jawbreaker, all those movies are Sugar and Spice, any of the things that we threw up in that pre-show, I mean, they all have that similar, like, feel of just, obviously some people are going to watch those and be like, how dare you? And then other, people like us, we're going to be like, hell yeah, this was awesome, and it's so fun. So, do we have any other audience questions?
One was about the mix of practical effects and CGI. How do you approach the gags and the mini deaths in this film? And
Yeah, that was a
patchwork
lot of
too, I
fun.
guess, right? Because you have a lot of effects in both your films.
Yeah, we have a fair number. Definitely a lot for the budget range. In Patchwork especially, but in Tragedy Girls, it was a little bit different because we normally when you do a movie of a certain budget, you're able to you kind of bid out individual like they call them gags, or we call them gags. So if you're gonna like chop a head in half with an axe, you go and ask 7 companies how they would do that, and then pick the one that you want to go with, usually the cheapest one, and then they come to set that day and chop the head in half with an axe. You see what I mean? And so usually you have a bunch of different companies doing little pieces of the movie, and we didn't want to do that. We wanted to do it old school where we had one company with like a small team that would build all the gags, even though they're quite different, and then they would come out there and be there the whole time. And so um, we had this company called Creature Effects that's owned by Mark Rappaport, who has done a lot of practical effects over the years. Back to like the Puppet Master series. And so he had kind of like this great a crew of younger guys and ladies who came out to do who built all our effects. And so like I always try and do things practically because I think that'll have the right flavor. But then at the same time, like sometimes you need to like you can things don't always go as planned, and then you have a little bit of backup to kind of help. Like we can add a little bit more blood, or take out like a scene from like the mold, or stuff like that. And so generally speaking, like most of what you see is practical in both movies, just because that's all we really had. But at the same time, like there's certain things that we there's no way around. And generally thinking, generally speaking, I'm a big practical effects guy, and I plan to keep doing them as long as the people will let me.
I think the rest of these are more like just people waxing your car a little bit, or that we already answered. So,
I have a couple more to finish off.
Yeah, I think you can just go wrap up, and if anything interesting pops in, I'll let you.
Okay. So just one last little like about you as a filmmaker. What made you pursue filmmaking? Is there any was there anything when you were younger that like made you want to do this? Just a little bit about your backstory on what brought you here.
Yeah, I was. I always loved movies, and both of my parents liked movies a lot, and so we definitely watched a lot when I was younger. Which is I used to draw a lot when I was a kid, and then eventually I got a camera, and then once I started taking pictures, I stopped drawing. And so it became a little bit more of a switch. And I also used to play a lot of like role playing games. Like I worked in like a comic book shop for a while when I was younger, and kind of got into that. And a lot of that is very like storytelling adjacent, and so between like the kind of photography stuff and just being a movie fan, and it just kind of felt like once I actually started doing it, first for like school assignments. Then I couldn't get enough of it, and then started doing a lot more of it like in high school, and then I did my undergrad in psychology, like unrelated to film, because I thought I was going to be a psychologist, and then ended up realizing that I was kind of lying to myself because I was spending all my free time making movies, and like staying up all night editing and writing and shooting on the weekends, and then not caring about the midterm, but really caring about like the making this deadline, and then and a lot of it was also very like filmmaking is very collaborative and very creative, and like similar to a lot of things like a lot of the reasons people fall in love with things like theater or like team sports is like a lot of the people that you are working with like end up being very good friends of yours, and they become very important to you because they're the type of people who are like with you during when you're figuring out who you are. And so kind of when you're in those kind of formative years, most of my favorite days are on set, and once I kind of realized that was the case, then I decided to go pretty full force into it, and then moved to Los Angeles and went to grad school, and and then had a lot of. It was fortunate to have some good mentors kind of early on, just kept making stuff, and eventually it gets bigger and bigger, and hopefully it keeps getting bigger, because that would be awesome.
Yeah, we hope so too. Okay, so what are you watching now? Obviously, we're all watching a lot of movies. Do you have any good recommendations? Anything out there for our audience?
Ooh, to be honest, I don't really have a great recommendation right this second. I kind of liked. Oh my God, I'm not okay with this on Netflix.
Oh, it's the series. The series.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was kind of like a sort of like Saved by the Bell meets Carrie or something which I kind of liked, but I think most of the reason I can't think of anything right now is because I just rewatched, or sorry, not rewatched, watched for the first time Game of Thrones.
Okay.
Because I was like, because I missed, because I was just not, I never had HBO, like I didn't see it the first time around, and I was like, when am I going to have 70 hours of free time at home again? And so I decided that the quarantine was the time, and I just survived that. But that's kind of
how was it? How was it to binge Game of Thrones and not watch it week to week and year to year? Did it play pretty well, like as an entirety?
Yeah, it played pretty well. I actually didn't see what the big deal was when people were really pissed about the last season, and just like really talking about like how it robbed the whole thing. I thought it was pretty consistent throughout.
I think it's because it's the delay and the people can always create something bigger or different, and they're so set on whatever they think's gonna happen, and they have. I think we waited like a year for that last season, and it was like so you had these cliffhangers, and you just kept imagining what it would become, and then it was like so different that people. It's similar to what happened to Lost. Like people just theorize and get so set in what they expect, and then when something different happens, they're like, "Fuck this show." Fuck it in its entirety. I didn't hate it as much as a lot of people. I could see why people weren't happy with it, but I was like, what else do you do to the end of this show?
Yeah, I thought it was all reasonably well set up. Like I was just like, like if you watch it like I did, like pretty much, like season 7 was yesterday. Like it seemed totally fine. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Whereas I know people were very up in arms about it. But.
Okay, well, where can we follow you and your work? Where can we find you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. One of the easiest people in the world to find. So, at TMacFilm is my Twitter handle. But I'm pretty accessible. Let me know.
Awesome. Well, do we have any other questions pop in, or?
No, I think we answered pretty much everything.
Okay. Well, Tyler, thank you so much for being here. I mean, when Adam texted me and said that we were doing this, I was so excited because, this little series monthly thing that I do locally just got way bigger. So I really appreciate you coming out and talking with us. We love this movie. It was an awesome pick for Not Another Chick Flick. And I just really had a lot of fun talking to you and like getting to know a little bit more about the background of the movie and just your whole process. So I just really appreciate your time, and I guess I'll kick it over to Adam if you have any things to tell us about Screenland or anything.
I got nothing. Yeah, you took all the words out of my mouth. It was a pleasure to have you. We were big fans of Patchwork, and then to see something entirely different, Tragedy Girls. So I'm excited to see what the next thing is, because while it's like clearly the same voice, it's you're playing. And you're playing a different game a little bit each time, which is nice to see. So, are there some great gags to look forward to in this Into the Dark?
Yeah, there's a couple. Yeah, it's the movie's a little lighter on the horror, I would say, but it's fine. I mean, I think there's some stuff they're gonna love.
Cool.
Awesome.
Well, we'll check it out. You said June 12th, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
June 12th.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us, guys. We will see you next time. I don't know actually when. We'll see you this Saturday for our 12-hour-long marathon. Have a good night, everybody.